Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're doing well, guys. Welcome to my room. Today we're going to be talking about whether INFJs can live dangerous lives, whether they can engage in types of behavior that can be a danger to themselves in particular. So before I jump into this topic, just remember that I have written a book on the INFJ type. It's called The Ecstatic Soul, available in the description box below. All the links are provided to all the different Amazon websites. Less than $10. You build your knowledge of the INFJ and you help me in the process. So what do we mean by living a dangerous life? I really mean living a life that could be of exposing the INFJ to danger with regard to their own physical safety, or with regard to their safety in general. And it's not a concept that is completely foreign to the usual understanding of the INFJ type, because we have at our disposal this concept of being in the grip of SE. And so I would like to first of all provide a brief recap of the descriptions that Jung provide in that respect. The concept of being in the grip is something that has become popular more recently, but it's really present, and not just in embryo, it's present in detail in the work of Carl Jung. So I'd like to look at how Jung defines the psychological mechanism that can lead to being in the grip, and why in the case of INFJ that can lead to types of behavior that can be a threat to safety, to the individual himself or herself. And then secondly, I like to look at, in keeping with one of the main theses of this book, at the existential logic that really goes deeper than the actual psychological mechanism. So to start with the actual mechanism, being in the grip is something that when you read about it online, you're likely to access interpretations that define it as something like this. As being like stressed, being in a mode of stress, and because of stress, so this could be due to difficult life circumstances, for example, not having a job, or being stressed by your job, or living in an area that causes stress. The environment itself can be stressful, of having to deal with people that stress you out, people that trigger you in whatever way, and not sleeping well, not eating well. There can be many factors that contribute to stress. And of course, stress is not something that, human beings respond to very well. Of course, different personalities will have different coping mechanisms, and some coping mechanisms are better than others. Now, it then follows from this state of stress that the state of grip somehow inverses the functional logic of a person. So if we take the example of an INFJ, you'd have a normal function stack. We'll call it a healthy function stack as NI, FET, ISE. The grip state, which is correlated with being stressed out, being prolonged chronic state of stress, somehow is imagined to reverse this order of the function stack in such a way that the function stack becomes SE, TI, FE, and I. So in a sense, this would be the function stack of an ESTP type, except that because it is a grip state rather than a normal state, the functions in this case are not manifested in a normal mode of use. So an INFJ in a grip state would not be like a normal healthy ESTP, but they would rather be the slave of their functions, primarily the slave of the SE function, and then the TI, FE, and NI. And so the logic leads us to the observation that an INFJ would then be exposed to responding to all sorts of stimuli due to their being slaves to their SE function in this case. And of course, such stimuli can involve things that put you in danger, like drugs, alcohol, violence, all sorts of things. And so sometimes you see either fictional characters or real life people being typed as INFJs because although they seem to display an SE dominance, they are not healthy, and therefore it's assumed that they're really INFJs, they're just not healthy. And that's an interpretation that actually doesn't really cohere with the definition of the stress state as provided in the contemporary literature. It doesn't cohere with it because the stress state is by definition supposed to be something that is not constant. You can't be living your entire life stressed. You can be regularly exposed to stress, you can be often stressed, but if you're stressed all the time, I mean, I don't know what kind of life that could be, being stressed over 30 years, 40 years. So I think this casts into doubt the usefulness of this idea of stress. Sure, a person can be unhealthy and stressed, but I don't think that this is the best way of conceptualizing how an INFJ can end up leading a life that's dangerous to themselves. I think that the more useful way is to go and remember what Jung says. You know, what Jung says essentially is that an INFJ is never going to be more exposed to the anarchic and archaic dangers of the SE inferior function than when the INFJ completely represses it in his everyday life. In a sense, when the INFJ makes the SE function the complete shadow, or not to use a complicated term, slave again of NI. So an INFJ will be all the more likely to fall into this grip mode when they act as if, you know, their SE function simply did not exist. This is because, as Jung says, when you use a function, you invest a certain amount of libido into that function. So the highest amount of libido would be invested in the dominant function, in this case, NI. But when a function is completely deprived of libido, it sort of recedes into the unconscious and then re-emerges in opposition, in open opposition to the dominant function. And so this mode of opposition, which happens from complete repression, depriving the function of libido, sinking into the unconscious, and then re-emerging in opposition to the dominant function, that's what Jung calls neurosis. And this neurosis, unlike the stress state, is something that can actually be pretty much constant and unfold across an entire existence for an individual who just continues to resist acknowledging the inferior function and acts as if that inferior function doesn't exist. And so you could have then an individual who is in practice using NI in a conscious dominant mode, but that use of NI will be polluted in some sense, contaminated by this conflictual and autonomous SE function that is archaic, that is infantile, but that's somehow will no longer be at the service of NI. That is what it means to be neurotic for Jung. And I think that when that happens for an INFJ, this is when they can really be in danger, put themselves in danger, because it's not just the punctual, occasional moments of stress or period of stress during which they might put themselves in danger. It's an entire lifetime where the opportunities for dangerous situations are obviously multiplied. As long as it's just a period, the INFJ being an introvert, being more or less, not crazy and wise, even when they're stressed, they'll probably manage to avoid those. They might experience some temptations, but I don't think that they would necessarily fall for them. But if their entire existence is one of repression of the SE function in such a way that the SE sinks into the unconscious and reemerges in opposition to the NI dominant function, that's when you could have bizarre patterns of behavior and indeed patterns of dangerous behavior. And I think then, to return to my point about the existential ground of this psychological mechanism, is simply that because the INFJ is a type that has always to deal with alienation from the outside world due to mostly unconscious SE, the healthy way of going around that, as I explain in my book, is to actually engage the other people, engage people in your environment, your friends, your acquaintances, people who are interested in what you have to say, to gather, to reconstruct the path whereby NI was able to gather material through SE. external facts, material from the external world. And this is how the SE function can be allowed to have, you know, its own existence within the function stack in such a way that it is certainly inferior, remains unconscious, but it is not repressed, because a door is open between NI and SE. And the door is acknowledged. And the acknowledgement of the function, especially the inferior function, is fundamental in this case. For the INFJ, it happens through conversation with other people. If the INFJ doesn't do that, the INFJ is still going to want to deal with alienation, find a way of surmounting this sense of alienation. And I think that existentially, the temptation of the autonomous SE function then has an explanatory role, because when SE is in that mode, in that grip mode, it offers what looks like an antidote to alienation by a confronting of reality in a very raw sense. And this is where the temptation of drugs and alcohol and violent behavior can be difficult to resist, because what else promises, although the promise is an illusion, a direct confrontation with reality, with something that is very intense, very physical, something that is very, you know, that seems like it's a natural force. It's an illusion because, you know, drugs are drugs, alcohol is alcohol, and these are only tricks that are dangerous to our health. But SE, when it is autonomous, when it is messing with NI, because it has been repressed for too long, offers that illusion. And the INFJ, who is not just stressed, but has a long history of repressing SE and is functioning in this mode of opposition between NI and SE, is all the more likely to fall for it. It's a false solution. The real solution is to get out of alienation by talking to other people. And by talking to other people, the body is recovered by the same token, which I explained in chapter 4. So if you enjoyed my video, drop a comment, a like, consider subscribing, and I will talk to you soon, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.